My stepmother completely lost it when she found out my father left his entire estate to me instead of her kids. Kids who had no interest in him despite his constant efforts to connect. In a desperate move, she stole the keys to my house and attempted to break in. But let me tell you, even I was stunned when I discovered the plan my dad had in store for her. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and this all happened not too long ago. My father was a well-established movie producer. And while we lived in a coastal country, he wasn't exactly world famous. His name was Theo, and at 48, he had already built quite a successful life. He met my mother when they were both 24, and they got married after she became pregnant with me. Tragically, my mother passed away due to complications during childbirth, leaving my father as a single parent for nearly a decade. Despite being surrounded by beautiful women eager for his attention, he always put me first, never letting his personal life interfere with raising me. During his early career, he made a fortune, and when I was 12, we moved to a city with a thriving film industry. Adjusting to my new school was rough. I was constantly bullied by 2 classmates who mocked my appearance. My dad, always busy with work, dressed me himself, which made me stand out in a way that attracted their ridicule. Things escalated when they pushed me down a couple of stairs. My father was called in, but due to his demanding schedule, he couldn't meet with the bullies or their parents, though he had always been there for me emotionally. His physical absence was undeniable. Realizing I was struggling to adapt, he made the difficult decision to send me to live with my grandparents. At least until I felt more comfortable in a new environment. My grandparents were nothing short of amazing, raising me as if I were their own. My father still visited on holidays and special occasions. But for the next 6 years, that was the extent of our interactions. Naturally, we grew distant. When I was 15, I started noticing my grandparents whispering about something concerning my dad. I confronted them, hoping it was news that he was finally bringing me back to live with him. But what they told me was entirely different. He had married a woman he met on set during a shoot. Apparently, they had eloped the night before and were coming to visit us. I was upset. From my perspective, my father had abandoned me and started a whole new family. But since I had no control over the situation, I simply sulked and waited for them to arrive. The moment Lisa, his new wife, stepped into my grandparents' home, I felt something was off. Her kindness seemed rehearsed, almost fake. At that moment, I was relieved that I didn't live with my dad anymore. As the conversation unfolded, I learned that Lisa had been divorced and had 2 children of her own. My father mentioned that I could meet them if I ever visited his mansion. Then, he asked if I wanted to move in with him now that I was old enough. Still hurt and feeling abandoned, I didn't hesitate to refuse. And with that, they left. After talking with my grandparents, I realized we all shared the same gut feeling. Lisa's kindness was nothing more than an act. But at that point, it didn't matter anymore. I focused on finishing my education in my grandparents' town, working hard to secure a place in film school. My goal was to study the technical side of filmmaking, especially camera work, and after years of effort, I was accepted into the best program. The catch? It was in the same city where my dad and his new family lived. I was content living with my grandparents, enjoying my independence. The thought of moving to the city worried me, mainly because I feared my father would try to impose restrictions on me. When he found out I had been accepted into the top film school there, he was thrilled at the prospect of having me nearby again. Before making my final decision, I made one thing crystal clear: I would not tolerate being monitored or controlled by him or his family. He agreed, but I was still hesitant. My grandparents, however, encouraged me to go, reminding me that I had worked hard for this opportunity. In the end, I decided to take the leap. Shortly after I arrived in the city, my dad invited me to visit his home. At first, I refused, but after constant insistence from both him and Lisa, I eventually gave in. Walking into my father's mansion, I immediately felt like a stranger. The house was filled with pictures, Lisa and her kids. Some of my dad, but not a single trace of me. It was as if I had never been a part of his life. Seeing my father, I noticed how much he had changed. He looked thinner and paler than I remembered, which concerned me. During my visit, he offered to pay my tuition and even invited me to stay at their house for as long as I wanted. But I refused. I didn't want to accept any financial help from him out of pity. Instead, I secured a student loan and moved into the college dorms. Just as I was about to leave that afternoon, I ran into Lisa's kids. They had just returned from their acting lessons. And the moment I saw their faces, my stomach dropped. James and Jake, the very same boys who bullied me when I was younger. I was speechless. The irony was almost too much to process. I wanted to tell my dad. But the truth was, I didn't know him well enough to predict his reaction. Instead, I called my grandparents. They reassured me that keeping quiet was the best course of action. My father had been married to Lisa for several years now, and bringing this up could unnecessarily strain my already fragile relationship with him. Reluctantly, I kept my mouth shut. I greeted James and Jake politely, keeping the conversation brief before leaving as soon as I could. Over time, I learned more about them. Their biological father was a wealthy businessman who had wanted to stay in their lives. But Lisa had accused him of domestic violence and taken the kids with her into her new marriage. My dad never wanted more children, but he agreed to raise them for Lisa's sake. Since the beginning, Jake and James had made it painfully clear they didn't consider my father their own. No matter how much he provided for them, they would openly mock and disrespect him, even in front of relatives. And they were part of the reason I was kept away from my father for so many years. Lisa never made any effort to ease tensions or help them adjust to their new reality. She simply didn't care, and that neglect took a toll on my dad. His relationship with Lisa had always been shaky, but having me in the city again gave him a renewed sense of comfort. He finally had someone he could truly trust. Over time, my father would occasionally hint at the state of his marriage. He confided that Lisa spent a significant portion of his earnings under the pretense of advancing her children's careers, something he strongly doubted was true. I chose not to interfere, simply listening whenever he needed to vent. One thing was clear: this marriage was bound to fail. During my time in college, I made an effort to visit my father and his family on weekends. But the atmosphere at their house always felt cold and unwelcoming. So eventually, I stopped going. However, I was forced to return when I received heartbreaking news. My father had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. It was aggressive, and he was given only a few years at best. Watching my father battle his illness was painful. But what hurt even more was seeing how miserable he was in his own home. Despite everything he had done for Lisa's children, including securing Jake a small recurring role in a sitcom, they never saw him as anything more than a walking ATM. My father desperately tried to form a connection with them, but they continuously dismissed him. And the worst part? Lisa never saw an issue with it. As his condition worsened, Lisa's presence became almost non-existent. By the time my father was on his deathbed, she had all but abandoned him. She rarely visited him at the hospital. And when she did, it was nothing more than a brief appearance. In his final days, my father cried to me, heartbroken and feeling utterly alone. Even though we had never been extremely close, I could never forget the pain in his eyes. I attempted to talk to Lisa, urging her to be there for him. Her response? Cold and cruel. She outright told me that she was more focused on her future than on waiting for someone to become part of the past. That was the moment I realized she was, without a doubt, one of the most heartless people I had ever encountered. My father passed away shortly after I completed my studies. At his wake, Lisa barely stayed for 15 minutes, just enough time to make an appearance when the big names of the industry arrived. Her sons didn't even bother to show up. That was the day I decided to sever ties with them completely. They were no longer my family. I planned to leave the city and move to another state to pursue my career in film. But a week after the wake, I was unexpectedly summoned to my father's mansion by his lawyer. When I arrived, I found Lisa and her sons already there, looking impatient and expectant. Then, the lawyer revealed my father's final will. To their complete shock, my father had left me nearly 70% of his assets, including his mansion. He had also set aside 20% of his wealth for his parents, though they were already financially comfortable. As for Lisa and her children, they received just 10% of his estate along with a condo in the city. But that wasn't all. My father had left me a final message, an apology for not being the father he wished he could have been. Reading those words overwhelmed me with emotion. Meanwhile, Lisa and her sons sat in stunned silence. For once, they had nothing to say. Lisa shot me an enraged glare before storming out of the mansion. I turned to my dad's lawyer, concerned about what kind of trouble she might try to cause. He reassured me that I had nothing to worry about. Anything she or her children attempted would likely be illegal. Realizing that I now had a home of my own, I decided to cancel my plans of moving to another state. Instead, I called Lisa and firmly told her to collect all of her and her kids' belongings because they no longer had any right to stay in the house. Unsurprisingly, she was furious and accused me of being cruel. Considering everything they were going through, I simply replied, "I'd rather focus on the future than dwell on the past." She hung up immediately, clearly unable to handle a taste of her own medicine. For the next few days, I received a string of nasty texts from her, but instead of being upset, I found satisfaction in seeing her finally suffer the consequences of her actions. That weekend, I left the mansion to visit my grandparents and update them on everything that had happened. Unlike me, they weren't shocked at all. They had suspected Lisa's true intentions for a long time but were glad that karma had finally caught up to her. After a relaxing weekend, I returned to the city, only to find my mansion's front door wide open. Fearing a break-in, I immediately called the police and my dad's lawyer, the only person I fully trusted in this situation. When the cops arrived and searched the house, they found the culprits inside, Lisa and her children. They weren't even trying to hide it. Instead, they boldly claimed that this was still their home and that no one had the right to kick them out. They even accused my dad's lawyer of conspiring with me to forge a fake will, insisting that there was no way Theo, their beloved husband and father, could have left them with so little. The cops were fed up with their childish behavior and were ready to arrest them. But just as they were about to proceed, my dad's lawyer stopped them. He told me he had a better plan and suggested that we hold off on pressing charges, for now. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but I trusted his judgment and agreed. He then pulled the officers aside and spoke to them privately before they left without making any arrests. He invited me, Lisa, and her children inside and asked us to wait while he retrieved something important. I won't lie, I felt uneasy sitting in the same room as them. But Lisa knew better than to risk getting arrested for assault, so they settled for spewing insults, accusing me of fraud and theft. A few minutes later, my dad's lawyer returned, carrying a sealed box. What he revealed next was something none of us saw coming. Apparently, my father had long suspected that Lisa was cheating on him. When his health started to decline, he noticed her attitude toward him changing drastically. So, he spoke with his lawyer and added a special clause to his will, one designed to protect my future. The clause stated that the share Lisa and her children were set to receive could increase by 30%, taken from my portion, but only if Lisa had remained faithful to my father for the rest of his life. And to make it official, she had to consent to this agreement. The moment she heard about the potential increase, Lisa's face lit up with greed. Without hesitation, she eagerly agreed and reached for the document to sign. But her excitement was about to come crashing down in a matter of seconds. Because there was another part to the agreement. It explicitly stated that if Lisa was ever found guilty of infidelity, with undeniable proof, she would not only lose the additional 30%, she would forfeit the entire 10% she had initially been given as well. And that's when the real chaos began. Lisa signed the consent form without hesitation, convinced that there was no way any evidence could be used against her. Once everyone had agreed to the arrangement, my dad's lawyer reached into the box and pulled out a USB drive along with a set of documents. He handed the papers to me and then opened his laptop to play the videos. Apparently, my father had secretly installed a CCTV camera in the living room, specifically to catch Lisa in the act. Not only did the footage show her bringing another man into their home, but it also captured multiple intimate encounters, solid proof that she had been unfaithful during their marriage. To drive the point home, the lawyer also handed me a stack of printed photos showing Lisa with the man she had been cheating with. I know this sounds like the plot of a dramatic TV show, but I guess my father had learned a lot from his career. Lisa, on the other hand, turned completely pale as reality set in. She had just signed away everything. Realizing what she had done, she immediately erupted into a full-blown tantrum, screaming that this was unfair to her and her children. She argued that she should have been informed of the evidence beforehand. But my dad's lawyer remained calm, reminding her that even this very conversation, where the terms of the will were clearly explained, had been recorded by the CCTV camera behind her. Her fate was sealed. James quickly stepped in to calm his mother down and ushered her out of the house. Knowing they had no way out of this mess. Before leaving, my dad's lawyer advised me to prepare for a potential court case and to change the locks immediately to prevent further break-ins. I took his advice seriously, called my grandparents, and told them everything. They weren't surprised by Lisa's behavior but were deeply concerned for my safety. Without hesitation, they decided to come stay with me for a few days. Update 1. 2 days later. Just as my dad's lawyer had predicted, Lisa and her children wasted no time in taking legal action. They hired a lawyer and filed a lawsuit against me, demanding a larger share of the inheritance. Their argument? Lisa claimed she had been tricked into signing the contract and insisted that the will wasn't genuinely written by my father, suggesting he had been forced to sign it under duress. To be honest, I have no idea how she plans to prove these ridiculous claims. But my dad's lawyer assured me that the case remains strongly in our favor. There is no evidence to support her fabricated accusations, so I have nothing to worry about. However, Lisa wasn't done scheming. When her lawsuit didn't shake me, she went behind my back and attempted to manipulate my grandparents. She visited them in an effort to gain their support, hoping they would help her fight for a bigger share of the inheritance. When they rejected her, she didn't take it well. Instead, she resorted to gaslighting my grandmother, making her doubt whether I had orchestrated this entire situation to cheat them out of my father's estate. For a brief moment, my grandmother hesitated, but my grandfather never wavered. He saw through Lisa's lies and refused to entertain her nonsense. In the end, all of her efforts were wasted. After discussing everything with my grandparents, I even asked them if they wanted the mansion for themselves. That's when Lisa took things a step further. She called me and threatened me. That was the final straw. I immediately filed for a restraining order against her, using the call as evidence. Thankfully, I was granted one without issue. Now, only my immediate family and, well, Reddit knew about this escalating legal battle. But Lisa, being the brilliant manipulator she is, decided to take a different approach. Instead of keeping this legal, she turned to my father's colleagues and contacts in the film industry. Playing the victim, she spread lies about how my father had forced her to sign everything over to me before his passing, claiming that I had plotted against her to leave her and her children with nothing. However, what she failed to consider was that many people in the industry knew my father well. They knew the kind of man he was. And they weren't buying her lies. The industry wasn't buying Lisa's lies. When she tried to paint herself as the victim, some of my father's colleagues called her bluff and challenged her to prove her claims. Others pointed out the obvious: she had a stable job. So why was she suddenly acting desperate for money? Her attempt to gain sympathy backfired spectacularly. Not only did she fail to manipulate people, but Jake ended up losing the acting job he had secured through my father. The production company didn't want to be associated with someone so deeply embroiled in controversy. However, one unfortunate side effect of this entire ordeal was that local media tabloids caught wind of the story. Suddenly, both my grandparents and I were being hounded for comments. My dad's lawyer advised us to avoid any engagement and stay out of the negative spotlight. But with each passing day, that was becoming increasingly difficult. Update 2. Things just got worse. Hey again, it's been a few more days. And unfortunately, instead of de-escalating, things have only gotten messier. I thought that after losing credibility within the film industry and Jake being fired, Lisa would finally back off. Maybe, just maybe, she'd take the loss and move on. I was wrong. She doubled down. And this time, she wasn't just coming after me, she was targeting my friends and family too. Trying to isolate me from anyone who could support me. It started with my dad's lawyer receiving a letter from Lisa's legal team. In it, she argued that I was emotionally unfit to manage the estate, claiming that I was still grieving and unable to handle the complexities of my inheritance. That alone was a low blow. But she didn't stop there. She also alleged that I had a history of mental health issues and wasn't capable of making rational decisions. To add weight to her claims, she listed names of so-called family friends who had expressed concerns about my well-being. The problem? Some of these people were individuals I hadn't spoken to in years. Clearly, Lisa had managed to manipulate or bribe them into backing her up. When I brought this to my lawyer, he reassured me that Lisa's claims were baseless. He reminded me that we had solid proof of my ability to manage the estate. And there was no way her argument would hold up in court. Still, the sheer lengths she was willing to go to in order to get her way was unsettling. And she wasn't stopping at legal battles. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Lisa had been reaching out to some of my dad's former business partners. She was actively trying to ruin my reputation, making it seem like I was incapable of handling my father's legacy. Fortunately, most of them had known my father well enough to see through her lies. Then, just yesterday, something happened that shook me to my core. I walked out to my car and found it vandalized. The side was keyed, and a note had been left on my windshield. "Karma's coming for you." I have no solid proof that it was Lisa. But considering the timing and everything else going on, it feels exactly like something she would do. I filed a police report. But without evidence, there's not much that can be done. Still, the incident rattled me. This is no longer just a legal battle, it's turning into harassment. I've spoken to my lawyer. And we're now preparing to revisit the restraining order in court. On top of that, we're including harassment and defamation charges. At this point, I'm not just fighting to defend myself legally. I'm fighting to protect myself. I'm doing everything I can to protect my peace of mind. But every time I think Lisa has hit rock bottom, she somehow manages to pull me right back into the chaos. It's exhausting. No matter how hard I try to distance myself, she finds a way to keep her grip on my life. My grandparents, who have been my unwavering support through all of this, had a long talk with me. They're just as fed up with Lisa as I am. My grandpa even suggested that I sell the mansion, move far away, and start fresh. I won't lie, it's tempting. The thought of leaving all this behind, escaping Lisa's toxicity, and building a new life where she can't touch me sounds like a dream. But at the same time, this house was my dad's home. Letting go of it feels like letting go of him. Update 3. The turning point. Since my last update, things have taken a dramatic turn. Lisa was officially taken to court. And let's just say things did not go the way she hoped. After months of dragging this mess through endless legal battles and threats, the court ruled completely in my favor. Her claims that she was deceived into signing the will? Dismissed her accusations that my father was coerced into writing it? Thrown out. Lisa and her lawyer were grasping at straws, trying to twist the narrative into something that would work in their favor. But the judge saw right through it. When the verdict was read, the look on Lisa's face was priceless. She had spent all this time convinced that she could manipulate the system, just like she had manipulated everyone else in her life. But this time, it didn't work. And that wasn't even the most chaotic part. Right after the court hearing, Lisa and her sons, Jake and James, got into a heated argument in the courthouse hallway. I didn't catch every word, but it was clear that her sons were furious. They had expected a different outcome. They had assumed they would walk away with a bigger share, believing their mother's lies and schemes would somehow pay off. But when reality hit them like a brick wall, they turned on her. There was a lot of yelling. At one point, Jake stormed out of the building, leaving Lisa and James behind. James wasn't far behind him. From the looks of it, they weren't exactly on speaking terms anymore. Later that evening, I got an unexpected phone call from Jake. To my surprise, he apologized. He admitted that he and James had been blind to what was really happening. He told me that Lisa had manipulated them for years, feeding them lies, making them believe that my dad was the villain, when in reality, she was the one who had caused all the problems in our family. Then, he asked if we could meet up and talk things over. Honestly, I had no interest. I appreciated the apology, but I wasn't looking to rebuild any kind of relationship with them. I had been through too much, and the last thing I needed was to get dragged into any more of their drama. So I thanked Jake for reaching out, but I told him I had no intention of keeping in contact. They made their choices. Now they had to live with them. I wished him well and made it clear that it was best if we all moved on separately. Final update. Moving forward. Hey, Redditors, this will be my final update. Everything has finally settled, and life is moving on. For those asking about my grandparents and how I'm doing, thank you for your concern. It means a lot. It's been a few months since the court case ended, and the relief I felt when the ruling came down in my favor was indescribable. After everything Lisa pulled, I was worried it would drag on forever. But now, there's no sympathy left for her. Not from me, not from her own sons, and definitely not from the public. Lisa burned every bridge she had. And now, she's left with nothing. As for me, I'm finally free. Lisa spent so much time scheming, lying, and manipulating to secure a larger share of my dad's estate. But in the end, all she was left with was humiliation. After the court case, I decided to release a short statement through my lawyer. I didn't want to get caught up in any more drama, so I kept it simple. I confirmed that the will was legitimate and that the court had upheld my father's wishes. I also made it clear how unnecessary and hurtful Lisa's actions had been, especially after everything my dad had done for her and her children. But beyond that, I had no intention of discussing the matter any further. My focus was on moving forward. Since then, Lisa's situation has only gone downhill. Her last-ditch attempt to gain sympathy by playing the victim completely backfired. The industry that my father had once helped her gain access to has now shut her out entirely. No one wants to work with someone who would air out their family's dirty laundry in such a manipulative way. Word spread quickly about the lies she told, how she twisted every situation to her advantage, and how she tried to destroy my father's legacy for her own selfish gain. And now? She has nothing. The fallout didn't stop with Lisa either. From what I've heard, Jake and James have completely cut ties with her. They moved out of the condo and haven't spoken to her since. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that they've been reaching out to people in the industry, looking for work, but after everything that happened, no one is willing to take a chance on them. It's unfortunate, but I can't bring myself to feel bad for any of them. They stood by Lisa's side as she spewed lies and made false claims. They played along with her schemes. Now, they're dealing with the consequences of their own actions. A new beginning. Throughout all of this, my grandparents have been my rock. Their unwavering support has meant the world to me. Once everything was finally settled, I decided to gift them the mansion. At first, they were hesitant to accept it. But eventually, they agreed. I know my dad would have wanted them to have the house. It feels right, and knowing that the mansion is in good hands brings me peace of mind. They've already started talking about renovations, modernizing certain areas while preserving the heart of the home. It's their space now, and I couldn't be happier for them. As for me, I'm finally moving on. A huge career opportunity has come up overseas, and I'm taking it. The timing couldn't be better. After everything with Lisa, I realized that I need a fresh start, a change of scenery, new challenges, a chance to focus on myself and my career, far away from the toxicity that's consumed my life for the past few years. But before I leave, I'm making the most of my time with my grandparents. This chapter is closing, and a new one is about to begin. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free.